I'm going to call the meeting to order, please.
Yep.
Thanks. Okay, we have quite a bit on the agenda, so I think we should get started. Beth has had to leave for a few minutes because they're canceling school tomorrow, so she has to work through the logistics of making that happen. So, Nick, you can stay with us till midnight.
Nick, you can say it was your first official act. You authorized the superintendent canceling school.
Confiscate his phone, by the way.
Yes.
And Liz had to leave, so she will not be. She was downstairs, but she won't be joining us for the rest of the meeting. So who?
Have you heard anything from Liz? Not Liz.
Keely has a
Keely.
sick child.
Keely has a sick child.
So
She is not going to be here. Yeah. Okay, so comments from the public? I don't see anyone. Consent items?
you got to move agenda item.
Oh, thank you. Great, Martha. So I'm going to ask that we change the agenda slightly, and I'm going to move the budget, the next meeting agenda and meeting takeaways above the budget work session so that Kim can leave. So we're going to do that. So back up to the top, any items that you want to pull from the consent agenda? If not, Martha, do you want to make the motion?
I will move that we approve the school board meeting minutes of January 30th, 2018, and the approval of the warrants as the consent agenda.
Great. And consent agendas do not have discussion, so all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Great. So, school board business. Our first item is high school choice numbers. Rob, do you want to come up and join us?
Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you. So what I will provide, as I saw there was a link on your org notes in terms of the frequently asked questions and the background of high school choice. I'm just giving each of you a hard copy of the school choice application form that we're now in prime time season. And I'll go through some of the salient points and also the history in terms of Essex High School, our numbers, and specifics. So each board has to provide annually in February numbers in terms of students in and students out. And our numbers historically have been we can have up to 40 students out. It's 10% of your enrollment, or 40, whichever is fewer. And this year we have 2, and that's a fairly common number in terms of students going to other schools. Our school board traditionally, and Al is with us, so he certainly has been with us every step of the way, has chosen the number 20 in terms of the total students that we will accept annually. And the rationale behind that was we certainly wanted to have a number that would be proper in the sense of not increasing FTE in terms of having so many students with sections, because the law at the time of implementation and now the ADM, the money, does not follow the student. So we didn't want to accept so many students that it was going to bump up FTE. At the same time, I think strategically, we wanted to have a number of students so that when and if the law did change, we would have a lot of students from surrounding communities that would have success stories at Essex High School, and they could spread the word, in other words. So that number has been, those numbers have been consistent since school choice has been in play. In terms of the application itself that you see in front of you, this is a blind application. By that I mean when we receive applications from other schools, it's the student's name, but no real specifics about the student. In other words, if they're on a plan, if they're not on a plan, if they play sports, if they don't play sports, if they, that's irrelevant, because the selection process for high schools is if you get to a number that is going to exceed the number that the school board sets, you have to perform a lottery. So I've been in the lottery business for 6-7 years now. Interesting track. But, on a serious note, our numbers, the first year, of course, with 20, we were able to take in all the applicants. This current year, we have 15 in, and we have, if my memory serves me correct, we have 5 that are senior, 5 students on school choice that are seniors, so we'll be able to accept 10. We typically get between 25 and 35 applications per year. So you can see that over time we accept 20, but it's based on the number of students who are going to exit that we have openings for. So the process and the timeline, applications are due by March 1st, which is a Thursday this year. We will run a lottery in the first 2 weeks of March. I will communicate to the families who have applied whether they have been accepted or I should say, where they fall on the waiting list. Because as you can see on the application form, which is why I wanted you to have it, they could apply for 3 schools. So we could be first choice, we could be second choice, we could be third choice. So we need to communicate to, in good faith, obviously, to the families so they know where they stand, so that they've applied to multiple schools, they can better plan what they're going to do. They have to in turn inform me by April 15th as to whether they're going to be coming for many reasons, 2 main ones that I can think of. Number one, so they can solidify the slot and select courses, which is always a good thing to do earlier, in that regard. And secondly, if they aren't going to accept it, then we can go to our waiting list right away. But honestly, July 15th, there also is another timeline in there where if something has changed over the summer, they can inform us that they are not, going to be taking us up on school choice. One of the biggest hindrances, if you will, has been students who have been accepted, but then over the summer they realize they can't find the transportation. That's an issue for some, so they have to back away from the offer. It's also interesting that they have to give us a reason, and as a board, I'm sure you're wondering what the reasons are for both going out and coming in, and I can do that fairly quickly for you. In terms of students going out, oftentimes that's the result of a family situation in terms of residency. I can give you the 2 students this year that we have that are out are students who have not been in the Essex Junction or Westford system, and due to circumstances beyond their control, after grade 11, they find themselves living in Essex Junction or Essex Town, and they've gone to school for, I'll just make up a school, CVU, the Chittenden South District, for most of their time, and they would like to graduate, which makes total sense. So that's usually the case of students choosing to pursue another school. There was a period of time early on, and Al, I'm sure you remember this, where prior to this Act 129, we had a relationship with South Burlington where our students could go there, their students could go here on a reciprocal agreement. And for a few years, there was some students that still were kind of carried over in the old agreement and now the new agreement, so our numbers were a little higher for the first or second year. In terms of students coming in, The reason they give is to access the wonderful course opportunities that we have in terms of our program of studies. And more recently, STEM has been a big draw for students coming in, and the Academy for Visual and Performing Arts. And last year, we've had the Global Leadership Program take off through the good work of Joe Prado, and that is generating a lot of interest as well. So those are the main reasons in terms of students wanting to come in. Not surprising in that regard. In terms of the second sheet or the backside, once the parent signs it, the student signs it. If I'm the principal of the school with the two students I mentioned, I sign it and immediately fax it to the school they're looking to attend, or schools if they're looking to apply to more than one. And when I receive that fax from the other registrar from high schools looking to have their students come in, obviously I sign it and acknowledge that I've received their paperwork prior to March 1st. It is possible to accept students after the March 1st deadline on a first come, first served basis. That's only if we have slots, which we don't usually. We have a waiting list. So that's school choice in a nutshell. Do you have any questions for me or comments? Yes, sir.
Do the students that are currently in the school choice have to reapply every year?
That's a great question. The answer is no.
So they're grandfathered in, but that actually opens up the opportunities for an additional 20 a year?
No, it's 20 total.
20 total, including the ones that are currently attending?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, but that's a question that we often get. It's not a process where they have to apply every year. And just as a sidelight for the board members, not to confuse school choice with tuition students,
Yep.
but just for your information in terms of tuition students are students from the islands and or the town of Georgia. And this current school year, we have from the Champlain Islands, we have 42 students in 9 through 12, and from Georgia, we have 44 students. And those are not school choice, those are tuition students. And obviously, the board is involved with setting rates for both Essex High School and the Center for Technology Essex. So that's revenue that we have.
No school.
Other questions from Rob? I have one, Rob.
Sure.
I was frankly a little surprised when you talked about the students going out this year, that you didn't have any students from Westford attending other schools. It was just such a huge issue during our merger discussion, and we spent a lot of time talking about this law as an opportunity for students whose families had always used Fairfax or Mount Mansfield to do that. Did we really not have any students?
We have two this current year going out. Now, whether we'll see a spike in applications for FY,
Right.
for 18-19, that remains to be seen because we're still in that window.
Right, but those two weren't Westford students? Interesting.
No. Yes, Andrew?
Andre?
But if a family elected not to go to Essex, but did not want to be part of the school choice, but would assume the tuition themselves, would they have to go through the application process, or would you be aware of that?
No, they wouldn't have to.
So-
And then that would be dependent on whether, because different schools, school boards, I should say, have varying policies as to how and if they receive tuition students, separate from the islands in Georgia that don't have a designated high school. So I know that varies, but that is a good point. And one of the slippery slopes for all schools to deal with are residency issues once students are there. For example, going in our current numbers this year, we have 15 students in, and we had 18 at the start of the year. One of the three, which we lost, we didn't really lose. They moved from I think it was Fairfax to the island, so they just changed status from school choice to tuition, and 2 others actually moved out of state that were previously school choice. But the residency is a tough one to keep your eyes on.
Sure is. Other questions? So you're looking for us to approve an incoming number of a total of 20 students for
Yes.
next year?
Yes, because
Okay.
it seems to have worked really well. And there's no impact negatively to the taxpayers.
Okay. Entertain a motion that we accept under the school choice law, agree to accept under the school choice law a total of 20 incoming students for the next school year.
So moved.
Thank you, Kim. Discussion?
Is it 2 separate motions? Do we make a motion for the number going out, or we don't?
The number going out is set by law.
Yeah, because
So
we're adhering to
You have
the.
to allow 10%, right.
Yeah,
So I
for
think we just need the motion
Correct.
for the number coming in. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Thank you very much, Rob.
You're welcome. Hopefully this helps.
Ni-
The
very-
understanding.
Very nicely
Yep.
done, very
Thank you.
clear.
It's a pleasure to see you all. Val? Yes, it is. Doing 2 different things.
Okay, so the next item on our agenda is direction of policy and a discussion of monitoring and review cycles. So Beth, are you going to do this, or or is Diane going to do it, or how are we handling this?
Oh.
How would you like to do it?
We can do it together. How's that?
Okay, sounds good. All right, so, in our policy meeting, we discussed that some of the policies that are coming up, we really need board input on. And so it's trying to get, I didn't bring my notes, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So, looking at 2 different systems with very different policies and backgrounds and trying to put them together into one. And the former CCSU had a lot, and that's what people sometimes are relying on. Some of those, so what we'd like to do is make some of those ones, and we've talked about with the whole leadership team, what ones were important that they had as a policy, but move those to procedures, like staff code of conduct, or some other ones, technology use, that were policies, and we'd like to move those to procedures. And also, I guess we need a direction from the board as to what would you like to do with policies? Do you want 100 policies, or do you want as few as possible? We've gone through VSBA's website. You have the recommended, the required ones, and now we're going down through the recommended ones. And there's only a few that Paul O'Brien and I have looked at, and Deb Anderson looked at, to really bring forward that we thought we really needed, but some of them we would like to make procedures. So I think that the purpose of this to be on the agenda is for you all to have a conversation about policy so that we can take that back as a committee. We have a direction.
They got the comfort level of the board. The policies will no longer be that standard outline, that it would be policy, practice, procedure, thing, the tree that is a standard outline. Some of them really are driving. It's really, the way things are now is that it's administrative practice or administrative policy or procedure. A lot of the policy ends up being state law. So it's really the district following state law, which we have to do anyhow. So we could either be redundant or just acknowledge that, the community and staff need to know what the practice is going to be adhering to that state law, and how that's going to be conducted. Others, it really needs to be a policy statement. And so it is a change from before, because it used to be the old outline, you outlined a paper, it was that piece. So I think that the flexibility of having that is going to be more effective for administration to run with, for operations and whatnot. But it's a matter of getting the comfort level of all of us as are we comfortable with going into a different format? And that's, I guess, to open up that conversation.
Thoughts, Patrick?
How many recommended policies does the VSBA have? Like, are we looking at adopting, we're not looking at adopting all of their recommended at all, right? Or are we going through the list to do all of their recommended and then we're talking about additional on top of that?
We went through all the required that you had, and there were
Yeah,
a
I know the
couple, there's a
required are
couple
done.
other ones too that even VSBA doesn't, but through accounting and some grants that we need to have some financial ones. So we will be bringing those forward to you. So those are really required, but not required from Vermont School Board Association. And then we went down through the recommended ones, as Kim's pulling it up. And there's only a few that we looked at that we thought that come up that we would rely on, or in the history of both districts that we would rely on.
There's actually a bunch, but I would definitely defer to fewer rather than more, just as I'm looking at the VSBA website.
Right, I guess I'm just trying to get a feel for, like, VSBA has what, like 30, 40 up there, and we want to pull 5, or do they have 700 up there?
Oh, no.
No.
No, well, I mean, I'm using hyperbole, but.
No, there's not 7. I would say there's approximately the same number. There's a few, doesn't it look like there's a little bit more recommended than there were required? Those that are required are by law. They look up almost equally balanced. I don't know how many required we had.
There was 19.
So
right?
I would bet
I was
there's
gonna
some
say 20, so.
20-ish.
Yeah.
There's probably 20-ish on the recommended category. Some of them seem procedural to me, like curriculum development coordination and education support systems. I mean, that is what we expect that we're hiring our administration to do. But I would definitely be interested in hearing those that you feel are important. I know that like search and seizure might not have been part of required, but I remember we had it in Essex Town even with policy governance because it was something Mark really needed to be able to lean on, to be able to
Right.
employ.
And one of the ones that we would like to look at is tuition payment, because that does, I mean, in the time that I've been here, that comes up quite a bit. And I think you just heard about school choice, and so there's some differences in that. So that's one that is recommended by them that I would say we should look at, but there's not many. More procedures we would like to follow through with, and we're working on some with the administration. As I said, we started this summer looking at which policies principals relied on and what could we do to make them a procedure. And then we've been working on those. We want to bring them back to the leadership team. Then they'll go to the policy committee and then here for just for you to see.
And I mean, interestingly, and I can appreciate where we might have the need for it because it keeps coming up, but as I read the tuition payment policy that's recommended, it's total procedure. It's not a policy on whether or not we'll make tuition payments because we're either required or not required to
Right.
make tuition payments. So it strikes me as being incredibly procedural. I don't know if we have a place that harnesses practices around things that are.
Yeah, I know that Paul was looking at that one. But
Just curious. I just
yeah.
happened to click on it.
yeah,
I'm
we can have that discussion when we
instant
bring it
gratification
forward.
girl over here.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
So let's try to keep the discussion at the level of, are we at a place where we think things that the administration is comfortable moving to procedure should be procedure? Because that's really that's been the focus of the essential work of school boards, that we not be involved in the things that really can be administrative. So are we comfortable with having just the policies that the administration thinks they need, as opposed to the thick book that, used to be recommended, frankly. But I think things have changed quite a bit over time. Al?
I just wanted to make one inquiry. Not all of you may realize, but Brian has spent a lifetime in the policy world. And we've had some legal issues that have come up from time to time. And we're very glad that we had a policy. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look at those, Brian, but your input could be very valuable here in a recommendation to stay with the procedure versus the policy. And I'd appreciate if you could share with us any thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved in certainly all the administrative conversations with an eye towards, I think, some of the direction that we were trying to move towards, understanding that too many policies become almost become a problem in themselves. I think laying out the procedures, I still think that the big sort of hanging question is whether you establish a bias for less policies and more deliberate procedure, or whether you create a bias that starts to look at good governance or a policy governance kind of model. I'm not sure if you can, I think that's still hanging out there. And for us as an administration, that's, there's a body of work that would have to get done. I think we still have a year and a half of work trying to pull procedures and documentation out of legacy districts into our new district. So there's time, but yeah.
But to Al's question, is it a matter that it needs to be policy, or is it a matter that things need to be written down? I think as long as you have a written procedure, I'm not sure it would have to be policy. I think you just have to have something documented. Okay, we got lots of people who want to talk. Let's just go down that side and over here. Brendan, Marla, Andre, Kim.
So my bias is less policy. In Essex Town, when I was on the school board, we had developed that sort of historical record of policies that were actually a booklet of procedures, some which actually were in conflict with one another. And when I was on the board in Essex Town, we actually during my time there, we moved to a policy governance board model, which I prefer. And I think that the time to have that discussion is not now, given that we're still trying to just get our district sort of up and running. But I do hope, if I'm on the board, in the next year or so, that we can start having a discussion about whether or not we want to move to a policy governance model. So in the meantime, my preference is less policy, except for the ones, of course, that we're required to have by law.
Marla.
I think we're better off with less and going through them the way administration is. I trust that administrators will be able to decide which needs to remain policy versus governance. The only thing I would ask as a school board member, anything that involves us having to use something for disciplinary hearing reasons, I would like to see that remain policy. Because I think when you have 10 board members sitting here, I think there needs to be something that guides us. And so I think you'll know which ones, and I think administration knows which ones. I think anything a board has to make decisions on, it's better to have the guidelines to follow, I think, in policy. And then where would parents find the procedures if they wanted to look at them?
We will be putting them in the policy that they're most linked. So some procedures now won't have a policy that they're linked to, but we'll put them in the category, like Kim is on the page right now. So if it's under personnel policies, if we have something like the staff code of conduct, that'll be within that column that will then say procedures, and then we'll have those. We just haven't developed, I mean, they haven't been created as procedures yet to be on there.
Once we're involved more with transportation, will we have more concrete guidelines for parents that's going to guide them where and when we're picking up students, or is that going to be more procedures?
That would be more procedures underneath the policy of
You
transportation.
don't want to have to change a policy every time you change how you do
That would be
that.
procedure.
Okay.
And basically, the policy for transportation is that the superintendent will decide. As if I know
It
so
does-
much about routes.
It does
But-
give us though, like a
Yes.
framework for that,
Right.
if, like, some kids who were 7 were going 5 miles and some kids who were 7 were going a mile, we'd have to have some reasonable way
Yeah.
to explain why that difference can exist, because we laid out in the policy the 4 different areas that Beth would need to consider in making her decision with Brian.
But
And the consultant.
we've done that policy already. Andre?
I guess I was always intrigued why we have policies when we're dealing with state laws. The state laws, in my view, provide in essence the policy, and we have to adhere to the law. So maybe I'm mistaken on that, but I would encourage less duplication, less redundancy.
But do you think it helps too, in that unless we want to have a section on the website that talks about state law, I think you have to have something so parents know what the rules are. So you can either call it policy or procedure, or you can just say, under student conduct, here is state law about X, Y, and Z. But I think you need to lay it out for parents.
Oh, I agree. I'm not saying not have the information. I'm just saying if there's a state law that we must
We don't
abide
need
by,
to reiterate
then why do we
that.
create a policy to follow a state law? And that, to me, is redundancy, that the state law
Right.
is the
But
guidance.
sometimes state law requires us to have a policy.
That's what
So-
I
It
was
refers
Well,
to the
okay, in
law.
that case, I'll accept that.
Then you got it.
And then-
Kim,
And I think in some ways, it just, I think to that point, Andre, is it becomes an affirmation that we are in fact operating
Right.
within the law and we're making that statement. So that's, I think, where the mandatory policies land, why they do, is because every district must have a policy indicating that they are complying with the law in those categories. And for example, the 2 that we brought in are ready from the recommended policies were in fact the search and seizure and student conduct and discipline. So those are from recommended, but we have them already because they were important and you guys already did that work. I will echo Brendan's sentiment. I think my bias is for fewer. My comfort is in having policies that we are going to monitor, that we are in compliance with them, and that we're going to expect the administration to monitor and provide evidence of how we're complying, particularly when we get to the place of having our vision, that we have policies that speak to the student outcomes that get us to that vision, and then we have the administration looking to provide evidence by way of student progress in various areas that show us that we're complying. And frankly, for us as board members to hold ourselves accountable, there's a couple of sets of policies that are board related that we would be self-reflecting. We'd sort of charge each of us at different times with doing a monitoring report and really reflecting on 6 months or a year's worth of practice and holding ourselves accountable to our job in different categories. And so that's the camp that I think Brendan and I come from, where we didn't have a policy that we didn't monitor. And as we evolved, we put these mandatory policies, as Mark would bring them as evidence. So like the bullying incidences or whatever would show up as evidence under our treatment of students policy. So I would love for us to be clear about what we're considering procedure, what we need is policy that's in fact policy, and otherwise be clear on our website you know, what our procedure or handbook or whatever it is that would guide people to know what our practice is.
Exactly. So I think I'm hearing that the consensus of the board is that we move toward less policies based on administrative recommendations. And is that the kind of direction you want?
That's what we need.
Okay.
Because we felt that the direction was needed because we are in that in-between, you know.
Legacy board,
Yeah,
right.
we haven't really nailed down a governance model that we're really on yet, but doing the policies as before versus this new concept of having just procedures, puts us more in a policy governance frame of mind, and it's a difference. So we haven't done that concretely. That plus just a different point of view. I mean, allowing us the flexibility to do is, and that's why we wanted to see if everybody was on the same boat.
So I think you've got direction about that. The other thing that's on this agenda item is monitoring and review cycles. Do you want to have that discussion tonight, or do you want to give that a little more time?
We can give that more time, that's fine.
Okay, good. So maybe you can come back with a recommendation. I mean, I think the monitoring piece is important, but having a cycle of review is also important, not just going back and revisiting a policy because something's happened and you realize your policy isn't up to date. So, great. Okay.
2017, now we're kind of lucky.
Yes, that's true.
2016. It's,
Okay.
it feels
So you're all set? Perfect. Okay, the next item is superintendent notification of staff members not returning for FY19.
So I get all the retirement notifications and all of that, and we have put them in consent items before and sent you information. I am feeling like they shouldn't be in consent items, but that I should pull them out and put them in board business so that names get mentioned. I just felt like that wasn't, you don't really approve them, they're just being named, right? It's not like you're gonna say, no, you can't retire. So I felt uncomfortable with them being there, so Deb and I talked about pulling them out and putting them there, so I hope that's okay. So I do have a name to bring forward to you, which started the discussion. Elizabeth Cohen, who was a teacher at Founders Memorial School. She took a year leave of absence, and she won't return. She wants to be at home with her young family. So, and I know that Wendy has somebody in there now, and then that will reopen and
That position
hire.
will
Yeah.
open.
So I also wanted to bring them to you because when you start to see hiring, you will know, like, oh yeah, that person retired. So doesn't come to a surprise for you.
Okay, great. Questions? All right, the next item is task team updates, communications. Patrick.
Yes, so Liz, Ben, and I met, late last week. And we started to go over how we're going to be delivering the budget presentation going forward, specifically points that we want to stress. And I think that there was a general agreement between the three of us that we wanted to be able to define and explain some terms to the public that honestly, even between the three of us, like, being school board members, like, I couldn't tell you exactly how yield is generated and CLA and like, so I'm not sure how we necessarily expect, people who are going to show up to these budget presentations to do so. So we're in the middle of we're starting to sort of explore that and then get some ideas for basic terminology that we want to kind of put down at a layman's level so that we can explain that better to the general public, and then focus on that number that we have for our equalized people spending and how that's decreasing, specifically as a target for what we want to put out there as a message to the community. Less about the actual board numbers, because in a politicized environment like we have, any increase, even though we're doing our job by decreasing the equalized people spending, to some people an increase is just an increase. So we don't want these numbers necessarily going out there without explanation behind them. So we're kind of working on how we want to present those and make sure it's coming with a unified voice that are stressing one specific number rather than, 2 or 3 different ones. And then I think Martha will probably meet, and then we'll get your input, since you'll be the one up there explaining to the community, right?
Right. And yes, as board chair, and we can talk about this, but as board chair last time, I wrote a budget report for the annual report, as well as a report from the chair of the district. So I'll be starting to work on those and working with you. I think the other important thing for the whole board to think about is Patrick and Liz and Ben are going to be the point people on budget. Ben monitors Front Porch Forum. So if anything comes up on Front Porch Forum, he'll be working with Ben and Liz with Liz and Patrick to respond. If things come up to you or in other places, I would ask, so that we have consistency of communication, that things go to Ben and Liz and Patrick, so that we don't somehow end up with conflicting messages, okay?
I have a document that I created in my last SU that actually used the amounts of that budget, but it walks through step 1, step 2, step 3, and I can send that to you. I'll send it to you also, but it
Okay.
explains it.
Yeah,
Up where it came from. Yeah, I will-
Website and stuff. It just, I think people
Yeah.
are much more aware this year, because it's been such a political point topic for education spending, that I think people are going to be looking at these numbers more closely, maybe
I
than they
agree.
would in previous
I
years.
agree.
So I just want us to be prepared to get up there and say, this is what we can control, this is what we can't.
And this, it would have to be changed for this district and even for these times, but it would give these times as
Sorry,
meaning
we
in
just-
Montpelier
Okay.
times.
We
But
just launched this on every one of the school pages, and on the district page is a direct link to budget that will track all the presentations. It also has the promise of merger as the final report from the red district. And then down below, it has different information with regards to tax rate, and then a great little video, a YouTube video on
Is that from the
Vermont's.
VSBA?
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, we should
Yeah.
put that link in the notes at some point, maybe? 'Cause that's-
So we're gonna start, Ben's gonna start to push this out, continue to have it as a one-stop
Great.
place.
Good.
Thank you so much for doing that, Brian.
It's really
Okay.
the photograph sells it, I think.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to put
except we have,
Add it in there.
That's
Can we
right.
Photoshop Nick?
Photoshop Nick in.
Until we have both.
There's
students,
a
then we'll
great
put Nick.
space right next to
There
Kim.
is. We'll put a school picture. We just need a school picture. You guys have access to it.
Okay, any other questions on communications?
I was just gonna say, I have a question or suggestion, I'm not sure which. Maybe a running Q&A document, so as we're answering questions and as they're coming up, that might be helpful.
We could, yes, create
Yeah,
something
just
on
be
the
a link
website.
that runs on
right.
the web, that's available on the website.
Especially for the things that you think might be common. Something that's off the wall, maybe not. Diane?
I second Kim's suggestion. I've been reading the local papers from our surrounding towns, And I think it's CVU has been running for the last couple of weeks, have been running a Q&A column actually as, to keep the public, in the loop and informed, so.
Yeah, and they have their vote coming up on
Of course, town meeting day, so
But
it's,
that might be something we could try to work with the Essex reporter to do. Yeah, that would be great, Marla.
I have a question probably directed for Nick, because he's our student representative. There are students that are voting age in the school and kids that are getting close to it. And I'm assuming they would have an opinion on the terminology that is used or the complexity. I'd be curious what students need to hear from us as we communicate the budget, besides just the taxpayers. Because I would think they would have concerns, but Nick can answer that better than anybody else.
As for taxpayer, I can't say it's going to be a huge topic of interest. It'll be a smaller niche for those who are, especially as there's a massive amount of people who are both of voting age and both who are interested in this. There would be a very small niche, but I assume those who are in the loop are generally knowledgeable of the general terminology. If anything, I think just like a general informative, a general informative document or just explanation of terminology would be a good first step.
Can I ask a question? Do you think it would be helpful, and would you be willing or have time to, just when we get that definition document, maybe have Nick put eyes on and make sure it sort of passes the person who hasn't been doing it for a bunch of years test, and maybe if there's a different twist on it that makes it interesting to the 18-year-olds in our school district, that could be offered too. Is that helpful? Is that maybe what you're thinking, Marla?
Yeah, I think.
Would that be, I don't mean to put you on the spot, Nick, would that be a
Yeah,
good
that's-
idea?
Utilize what we added on to the board.
Jazz it up and
Yeah.
make it accessible via Snapchat.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. I'm going to keep moving us along because I'm conscious of the time. So the next item is the local board and statewide updates. And last time we worked through 2 documents that Kim and I had worked on. Brian, oh, look at that. That's the second one. Can you get the first one? Look at you. Whoa.
I impress myself at times.
So,
Low expectations.
Brian was able, with the help of some others, to get some specific numbers for some of the items that needed them. And we didn't reword too much on this first document. So,
Was this the one at the bottom? There was one.
right,
that we had to
because
address.
Keely had asked us, I think, keep going. That one.
Oh,
That
no, it's
access-
actually the other document.
It's
I'm
the
sorry.
other
There was another
type,
document
right.
that we hadn't addressed.
But I did reorder this based on Keely's suggestion that we focus on a general comment first and then the specifics. But I really liked seeing this and seeing that we're, at least last year, we were even below 115% of for the threshold. So, questions, comments? I would like to vote on this document so that when I send it to legislators, I can say it's coming from the board. So are folks comfortable with that, Marla?
I have a question. I don't mind voting on it as long as the motion says subject to changing grammar, typos, and missing words or duplicated
Are there
words.
problems?
Has Keely
Yeah,
looked at this?
yeah, there. Well, for instance,
Well, I don't want to go through it all.
oh,
right
well, I can give you an
I'll-
example.
now. Yeah,
If you look under 1.5 million, go down to the comment section.
Right here?
this change. Yeah, okay. I'll go through it
And
again.
there's a few
Yeah.
places like that.
I'll go through it again. I think I can pick them up. As I told you last time, it was a struggle to do the first part, because when you copied and pasted, it changed things, and
And then I
Kim tried to
I was
do
like,
it.
I think I can do it, Martha. And then I tried to do it. It's like, there's like letters that aren't even letters in our language showing up on the thing. And then I was like, I'm just going to be typing. And then I couldn't print it. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah,
I
it
think
was much
they know what
harder
their-
than
They know
it
what their
should have
memo
been.
said. We're going to
Right,
tell them what we think.
okay.
Maybe a million saved.
Any other comments? Okay, so I'll entertain a motion that we approve the first set of comments on Governor Scott's education cost containment ideas to be shared with our senators and representatives from all three of our communities. Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Andre made the motion.
I would just,
And we don't second.
I don't, we,
Okay.
We
I
have-
was just going to
do
suggest,
some-
Martha, that we copy the VSBA.
Yes, I was thinking I would do that. Yeah, I will do that. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. So then with the second document, the question is, do you want this to be a board-approved document, or do you want it to just come from Kim and me? And frankly, I don't have strong feelings either way. It will carry more weight if it comes from the whole board, but some of these concepts aren't necessarily easy to understand. So what's your pleasure?
This is heading in the same direction to the.
Well, this is part of the same memo, but these were not these weren't things that were so specific to the school district. These are things about the formula and some other ideas like that. But they were all part of the original memo from Governor Scott. So
If they're interested.
they're part of what the legislature will discuss, yes.
But I think if the first part's going to the legislature, into the VSBA, my thoughts, we should practice consistency, because this is actually a story as well, so I would advocate sending it to, yes.
Anybody object to the board approving it? Okay, then I'll entertain a motion that the board approve the second document also for distribution to our senators and representatives from the board. Thanks, Brendan. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. And I will go through it carefully, and maybe Kim can too, and see. I'm gonna have a snow day tomorrow, so. I should be able to do that. Wonderful. Thank you so much. At some point, we should probably have a discussion about the funding proposal that's on the table in the House. But I've been communicating with some folks about it, but it's still changing a lot at this point. And clearly we don't have time tonight to talk about it. But we'll do that at a future meeting, okay? Yes.
One comment, I want to thank you and Kim, this is a lot of work. And it's a lot of information. I'm gonna admit, I wouldn't know these numbers and whatever Brian and Beth have added to it. It's a tremendous job, and I thank you.
You're welcome.
Our pleasure.
I know. We get into this geeky stuff.
Yeah, we do.
I was
She
reading
and
it
I
today
had
again, and I
fun.
was like, God, I love working with Martha on this stuff. She
Yeah.
knows it. She lived it.
Yeah, it did live
awesome.
it. That's for sure. Okay, so we're gonna move now to the next meeting agenda and meeting takeaways. The next meeting is a budget workshop, and we'll probably have to have an executive session on support staff negotiations, but we're hoping that's all we're gonna have for that agenda. Unless we're trying to keep the budget workshops to budget workshops. How we haven't been very successful this year. So that's what I think we should say about the 13th.
I have a comment about
Yeah,
that.
it was-
So I have put the agenda together with Brian. It's just an agenda. I have no like extra notes. So is that okay that you don't receive notes? Basically, I would take it and form it into notes with nothing extra. I mean, it just tells what we're gonna talk about. I have it ready to
Kim
go.
put that together.
And if Brian ends up, with, I don't know how you want to do the slides or whatever, those could always go out. But I
Well,
just felt
if-
like, I started to
right.
do the notes, like I have nothing to.
I think the only thing would be if we had come up with questions tonight about the budget that Brian wanted to answer before the next meeting.
Okay.
That would be a good thing to do. But aside from that, no, please don't create notes for the sake of writing the same things over again.
Thank you.
Okay. So takeaways,
School choice numbers.
yeah, I think you could do that. I think we'll have something from the budget. Probably,
Policy discussion.
Or maybe
how
not.
much that
Yeah.
might be too much in school board weeds for. You might talk about the fact that the board created responses to Governor Scott's memo of that containing a menu of ideas about education funding and cost containment. And perhaps we can, who should I send those to if we wanted to create a link? Ben? Lauren? Ben? So
It's not
I'll
taking notes.
send them to Ben so that we can create a link. Anything else?
What about our attendance at the presentation this evening?
Oh,
yes.
yes,
I think
absolutely.
a note of gratitude for it being hosted and the resource being brought to share great
Yeah.
information.
It was,
It's great.
it was really good. Yeah, I think that should be number one, probably. Yeah. Thank you. How quickly we forget as we get mired in these meetings. Anything else?
I think that's fine.
Okay, so, Kim, thank you. You don't have to rush off right now, but
Stay for my presentation.
We won't be offended. Brian especially won't be offended.
okay, so back to the budget work session. Brian.
So, I tried something today in creating a folder that's available to everyone on the board. If you wanna look at it electronically, here's some hard copies.
Did you get Nick on the distribution?
Um,
What do you mean by a folder?
And is it a folder in like a shared
So
drive?
you got a share in your board email that would give you access to a Google folder that would have tonight's presentation, the promise for merger presentation, and the public version of last week's. And Nick, I think I need to add you to it. Do we have you set up as a board address as well yet?
Not yet.
Okay. So I will get that right now. We've got a hard copy for folks. Is there enough going around? Great. I guess I just wanted to start. I've been receiving some feedback. I don't know if you've received any, but the public presentation that went out right after the next day after the board meeting, we shared it internally to all the principals, all the directors, all the central office staff. It's made its way around. I've received a number of comments from employees of ours that had also seen it and been directed to it. Is there some feedback that people have heard? Yeah, it was positive that the information was out there and that there was some evidence of work and it was available and people appreciated that, so.
So Brian, I forwarded this, bless you. I forwarded this to you, but I just wanted to mention that I did hear from a parent and who's also a teacher concerned that the way that we show our average class size numbers, as actually I think you and Beth both indicated last week, sort of obscures some of the pinch points in the system where there are certain classes that are really jammed in certain school buildings. So just wanted to make sure that that was something that was on your radar. And I know that at the building level and at the classroom level, things are, try to balance things as best you can. But that was a concern that somehow that the way we project or describe those numbers obscures some of the real challenges that some face in classes that are overcrowded.
So, one question I had was, and I don't remember exactly what meeting you shared this, but you did share a school-by-school number when we talked about class size guidelines. So if we can make sure that's on the website, that might be helpful. And then I think the other pieces that Beth and Brian have said, they will be looking at asking folks if they're willing to move to even some things out.
Yeah, we can certainly do the de-aggregated data and take a look at it. Our schools aren't broken down by the exact groupings necessarily that we have, and there's a series of pressures. I think we always have represented that policy as a policy that provides us the discipline to have the discussion and to dive into the conversation.
Yeah.
And that on the micro basis, we not only have it direct us to take a look at it, but we like to look at previous years, class makeups and everything. We haven't seen places in which, even though the averages sometimes obscure where there are some bubbles, we haven't been experiencing classes that are exceeding the state board's rules. So we continue to be operating within what is considered current practice.
I think that in case of this person, it was it could boil down to the fact that they disagree with what the guidelines are, and think they should be, smaller. So yes, I'm definitely understand that we meet the state guidelines in terms of not exceeding that maximum. I just think that maybe there's some disagreement over what that maximum is.
And there's lots of research out there that class size doesn't make a difference.
Right.
And I know that's really unpopular, but that's what research says.
Except in the
A lot
very
of research.
early.
Yeah, except for early,
Right.
early on.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is why we chose as a district to actually veer away from state board standards or the rule, to actually have class sizes smaller in the kindergarten developmental age.
Yep.
But I think this person's point was also that there was a group of students who had been in a large class all the way through, and were we thinking about that?
Yep.
It's hard to know how to respond to that. Those things happen sometimes for lots of
As
reasons.
does the opposite. We have,
Right.
we have an
Yeah.
extremely small class that's working its way through the system, and that in itself creates a volatility sometimes in grade clusters and grade groupings.
Exactly.
I think one of the other recognitions in that statement, and I had seen it as well, Brendan, and it has been a common theme of the family who also happens to be able to appreciate that there are loops that happen in the middle school and teams that work together and the disruption that might happen with that. So one of the things that I wasn't exactly sure I was hearing was what the reconciliation is on that. It sounded a little bit more like it was simply to really acknowledge that some buildings are experiencing larger than what is evident by an average. And I think that that's been the only way to really satisfy that historically, because, even I know Abby's class is a bubble class. We know Abby and Maggie's class, they've been traveling through as a bubble. So there are years they had bigger classes, and we were, as a parent, came to understand what resources were going to be to support the teachers, because the teachers didn't want to disrupt a team. And that was, so I wasn't exactly sure that I was hearing that there was a need for there to be an action so much as a recognition. And so that could be solved. I do remember also when you guys first shared the school-based numbers with us, there was some question of the numbers because probably of grade clusters and teaming and stuff that didn't play out cleanly when you first presented those numbers. So to the extent those numbers are clean or they've been reconciled with Kevin, I think that was the building
Yep,
that
it was.
not clear. That so if that's all clean now, then that would be good information to have, because I think it's been part of every budget conversation we've had for years now. And
Should be.
And I think that, clearly not intentional, but I think sometimes there's a perception that the way that we present the numbers is meant to obscure the detail. And I think if we just provide the detail as well, then we can be as transparent as possible.
Good point.
Okay,
Great.
take it away.
So tonight, we're gonna focus on some more further numbers, getting to know our district by numbers. We'll do a second draft overview. We'll talk and dive a little bit into its instructional support, visit the capital plan for the first time, review our tax impact, take a look at savings from consolidation, and then come back to budget guidance. So what will happen over the course of draft 1, draft 2, draft 3, draft 4, or where we are in 4, is that there are slides that have now dropped out of this presentation but will be part of an overall public area. And Ben and I have talked about pulling specific parts of slideshows out so they become sort of episodic. So you could imagine like capital fund, the series of slides there could pop out and just be a place where people could say, I want to know about the capital fund, or I want to know about that. So we'll continue to be building value out of these presentations so people can grab information quickly. So by the numbers, adding some numbers tonight, that we have over 7,100 network user accounts on our computer system that is managed by Vince and the information technology folks. Over almost 400 Wi-Fi access points, 2.1 million Google Docs, and over 10,000 total network devices are connected on a daily basis. So the size, the complexity of the computer network going across our buildings and into our instruction is quite large.
Brian, the network devices, does that count like my network device being, so it's just the access, not necessarily that, I think that's
We
a good
own
thing for
them
us to
all.
have an answer
Right.
to, like, we don't own 10,000 devices,
No, but
but
probably,
we've got
we-
folks accessing.
we probably own close to that.
Do we really?
Yeah,
Yep.
I mean, because everything hangs off of the network now. So all your printers, all your copiers,
Oh, yeah, yeah, okay.
our phone systems are all voice over IP.
We don't have 10,000
right.
one-to-one, just the sort of things that would provoke people. I think it's good for us to know what network devices means.
So in the second draft, what I've got here is, we have the overview. I've highlighted a few areas here in this column that have done some changes, some that I can mention now, some that will be coming up in our next budget work session, some that we can talk about in further detail this evening. From first draft to second draft, we're remaining at a 1.7% change in gross expenditures, and just roughly about the exact same number. I think it's off just by a few $100s. There's a lot of movement inside. I added some cushion room up in regular education for some potential yet to be discovered tuitioning students for Westford, because we're just still working through data and trying to make sure that we're capturing everybody in that process. There's just such a large variance between FY18's budget and FY19's budget that I just feel more comfortable giving a little bit of cautiousness to that. And then we'll dive into these under instructional support. They're changes that really are changes from numbers that you'd seen, but not from presentations. And again, down below, I did note, and you'll see later on as we get down into it, there's been some consolidation of some of these functions. There was a number of functions that some of them may have been $5,000 functions and others were $5 million functions. So there's been some consolidation under how we're organized. As you can see, like district administration services, instead of delineating all the personnel services versus fiscal services, it's just this basically our district office. But the key here is we're still at that 1.7% gross. For revenue, we did see some revenue as I worked with the auditors this week with trying to finalize and get bound copies of our audit. I felt more comfortable to go from 1.4 million to 1.455 million. Still is a slight cushion on that just to make sure that nothing does come up or is any surprises. It's about a $15,000 cushion, but as you know, we're required by law to roll that forward. So trying to do so with full allegiance, but also just understand that we're talking about big sums of money, and $15,000 is a small sum of money that can get overcome pretty quickly. I also went back into building rental and made a very small adjustment in building rental just to account for what our past experience has been. And so, again, that was a matter that going from the 18 did not represent all the revenue that we normally now expect with all the districts coming together. So there's a small part there. It did make a change down here, so we now have offsetting revenue of 16.3, and that's increasing by 5.2%. That obviously has an impact when we go to understand what the state support amount is, which is slightly declined. So here's the educational spending, which would be that net. We're 60.2 million, which is up just around 0.75% from FY18, or approximately 467,000. Now note, this is before the capital fund allocation. We're still there. I'll wrap that in right after we get through the capital fund. And based upon that educational spending with our equalized pupils, now our equalized pupils, as you remember, was 0.88, minus 0.88%. It's now minus 1.01% because of the slight decline in expenses and the additional revenue come in to change our educational spending divided by
So-
equalized pupils.
Okay, so the equalized pupils hasn't changed. Education spending per equalized
What
pupil.
was it last time, Brian?
0.88.
Yeah,
I was taking it as
Good.
way up, and I'm like,
And,
I
you know,
said it
so
went down, so.
we're also, I mean, I know that everyone sort of works their study differently, but we're kind of moving in a race and not in a station wagon, so we're not gonna do differentials between drafts per se. I'm sure I can see everyone's flipping through pages to see it, but ultimately, we're working towards a final budget we're recommending to the voters to consider. So, you know, that's gonna be somewhat dynamic. I'll try to make sure there isn't a matter of like smoke and mirrors or something's changed and you don't know where it is, but I'll also not, I won't continue to have slides that say one draft that now is improved was this and now this. And I think it's just more important to be focusing on what is the difference between 18 and 19. So we'll go into instructional support. And as you know, this is the area where we have guidance, health, speech, language, curriculum, library, and so forth. That is another area that is staff heavy. Our investment is primarily in personnel. 86% is actually the heaviest we are, where instructional programs is about 84% weighted towards personnel costs. And the administrative other support is actually a little bit more of a 60-40 environment, because that's where we have a lot of our equipment purchases, our utilities, our services, and so forth there. So this is a place that is the highest percentage of personnel expenditures. So this is the areas that we have within there, and you can see that we start with social work and go down to library services. A number of these are connected to our student services. That is headed up by Dylan and Aaron. So for instance, social work, health services, psychological services, speech and language, occupational physical therapy. Those are all related, and those costs are all related to plans, needs, student identified needs, IEPs, and so forth.
So, are you prepared to talk about, there's some pretty dramatic changes in
Yeah.
some of those areas?
So what I've done is I've grabbed out the
Okay.
sort of the
Thank
three
you.
areas that have
Yeah.
some of the most significant changes, and we can go back to some of the other
No,
questions. But
that's,
in this area, in psychological services, our big part that we have is increase in outside psych services, particularly for Quest and Rise. This is just based upon who the student population is that we have coming in now during this budgeting process. You know, that actually, students never stop coming in and never stop leaving. So, but we're anticipating through service plan and evaluation of needs that we're gonna see a large increase, about doubling of our need for outside psych evaluations and services. And then the salary change is really an issue. Normally, you should be seeing most of the salaries increasing if we're not having a change in staff. In this case, what we're seeing is in FY18, there were people budgeted under psychological services that were actually support personnel that were up in special ed. So, it's just some
so
movement there.
what are Quest and
There's
Rise?
2 programs that we offer within the school district. So it's, I mean, I put that detail there. It's really the primary thing is just an increase in outside psychological services. We don't have the personnel to meet those specific types of demands, so we contract for those services.
The services come in,
Still
but the
don't know what
program is
Quest and Rise.
in the program, those are EWSD programs offered within our schools, this Quest and Rise, that is being staffed by outside contracted services coming in. Did I get that right?
I believe so. I think what I've done is I've added an anecdotal piece of information that has sparked a high degree of curiosity. So we may have a
If that-
It's a
disconnection
contracted service.
between anecdotal,
in
yeah.
the
Well,
psychological
if
category,
that's
and
on the
that's what's- it's not
website, I
necessarily one
have
of
to
our
know
programs.
what those
Yeah.
things are.
Which I would say, the best thing to do would say an increase in outside psychological services.
Yes. that-
In the Essex Town School District, I know that there had been an attempt to bring some services into school buildings, and so what I see here are I see a lot of contracted services. So I'm just wondering, like, what is our philosophy on some of those services? You know, do we work to build internal capacity, or is it better for students and budget to have those outsourced?
Yeah, I think it depends.
Yeah.
I think in social work primarily, we see that there's a high advantage to contract out. And that's with regards to some of the conversations we've had, and that there's a primary provider at Howard, and Howard is a designated agency and therefore can receive Medicare directly. So their services are considerably less than if we provided them ourselves. In other cases, you can see, like in psychological services, we're not reducing the amount of internal capacity we have. We have a new demand for it, and that new demand, if it isn't similar or like what we're providing, then it's more effective for us to contract for it. If it is something that we're providing and we have the caseload ability to manage it in, that would always be our first preference. We do, in a general state, as I talked about with special ed, we have a small number of really, really highly intense need students coming into the district. So those students are coming in and creating new needs like that, and new needs in special ed that you saw with like outside placements, technical services, and tuitions, which are extraordinarily large for a small population, but it's how it works.
I think we talked last time too about the fact that with occupational therapists, they just can't hire them for what we pay. So it might be our preference to have in-house staff.
We've had
But-
one advertised for
We've
quite
had a
some time.
vacancy, and so
Yeah.
far this whole year with that vacancy, we've not been able to fill it and are contracting for it. So sometimes there's a matter of that the budget looks one way, but the reality is that we haven't been able to execute that. We're also trying to hire at a 0.8 occupational therapist, because that was our case demands at the time. We now know that we need like a 1.2. So that, knowing that we weren't successful at a 0.8, that we'll just go. And this, I would not be surprised, is a matter of a flip-flop. In 2 years, we could see that, take a look at our population and say,
It's been our
we could go the other way with it.
Can I ask Brian if that were to present itself as an opportunity over the course of the year or in the summer? Because somebody who's moved into town and is able to take the job. Does the job remain listed, and are you able to shift then where you are? Is it a budget adjustment or whatever that would allow you to continue to hire? By zeroing that out, do we prevent you from being able to hire somebody if they
No,
have
the
become
capacity,
available?
in theory, the capacity would be there.
Okay.
I mean, it may not always be a one-for-one situation.
Yep.
I mean, a lot of times, in addition to the salaries, you've got employee benefits, but also in addition to a contracted service, you've got a margin or a rate or a premium that you're paying as well, so.
But you're not prevented by zeroing that out from making that adjustment if you find that the personnel presents itself?
We're doing that right now.
That's what it is.
Because that
Okay.
person hasn't presented themselves, we've moved to a contracted service.
Thank
So
you.
that's,
At
right
some
now,
point, you're gonna have
that's-
to sign a contract.
Yeah.
and-
Got it.
And then down here, this is the instruction and curriculum services. This is the grouping together of learning design, the tech integration specialists that we have, some other curriculum services, all grouped into one. The salary decline is represented as the elimination of the learning design director position that the board had heard of at the beginning of the last month or middle of last month. And then the spikes in supply is to resource the introduction of a math program in EES and FMS. So that's introducing so that those two schools at a K-5 level will be on Bridges, the same math program that the EMS is on right now, all of the Essex Junction schools and the Westford schools, which will really help us spark a lot more robust professional development, cross-training, and supports across the system. But, bringing in a program, it's a good demonstration. That program is in here for about $90,000. So we did some reducing of current supplies for books and periodicals and brought it in. So a program to kind of launch is about $90,000 and then has an ongoing cost that is intended to replace other costs, but that ongoing cost is a good $10,000 to $15,000 a year for consumable supplies, and then this whole PD around it.
Right.
Those are the major changes. I'm gonna go back just quickly, just to see, out of here, out of these changes, I ended up picking some of the larger ones. Guidance has a large variance, primarily because guidance ended up, as I worked through this with Deb, it just works out that guidance was one of the ones that had some of the most substantial changes in steps and levels when, there's pockets of population of teachers or certain job categories or families that have a different treatment when we needed to move everybody onto a new salary schedule. So it's a little bit higher than some of the others, and it's just it's just that kind of circumstance.
Do you know what's happening in wellness?
Yeah, wellness, the EPS, the grant money that we get for wellness has been indicated is reducing from 55 to 35.
Okay.
So what we'll do is just reduce some of the
Expenditure.
costs that we do, and that has to go and tie out to the revenue, so that revenue has neither a positive or a negative impact to our taxing capacity. We may spend, obviously, there may be some combination work that happens throughout here to make sure that our wellness efforts are staying robust.
Yeah, okay, good.
So, I mean, in just some of those quick facts with the instructional supports, it's 105 FTE that are in this area, so it's still a good portion of our overall workforce being, say, 950 or so. And then it is, if you remember, in the instructional side, we had almost 6,700 years of service. This is a little bit younger. There's a little bit more turnover in some of these areas. It's also smaller population, but it's about 1,580 years of service, collective service. The average salary across this entire population is about $45,000. And then the average total benefits, so this would be FICA, retirement, medical, health, dental, all of those things, about $13,500. It's about a fringe benefit cost of about 30%. So 30 cents on every dollar you pay in wages, you're paying in a fringe for benefits, which is pretty typical. It actually can go down as low as 25, but that also usually means the salary goes up quite a bit. So
Okay.
it's 25 of a bigger number.
So employees here includes paraprofessionals as well as certified.
Yeah, we have, in this grouping, we have full year,
Whatever,
we
so-
have full-time school year, part-time school year, we have, so there's quite a mixture of people that,
Range of,
yeah.
yeah.
And you
Okay.
imagine something like a library situation where you would have a certified staff usually, would be like singular, and then you would have a professional or admin staff, and then you'd have a technical staff. So you'd have various levels of qualifications that would happen in there.
Okay.
Total projected cost for this area is 9.8. So I'm gonna jump into the capital plan. So the capital plan, I'm reaching back a little bit to structure the capital plan. First off, I believe that it's sound stewardship to make sure that we have the resources to maintain the assets that people have invested in over the years. And there's I like to think of it as 4 primary areas of focus for our capital investments. That there's environmental enhancements and efficiencies. These focus on our systems, infrastructure, HVAC, doors, windows. It's usually, we're looking for energy efficiency. We're looking for things that make our creature comforts better and more optimized. And then we have our system and instructional technology. And this is our network, as we talked about, that just as we began the meeting, the size and intensity of our network, and making sure that we replace the critical hardware. This is the hardware that may be in the back of a building, in the back of a closet, in the back of a rack that actually keeps everything working. So these are the critical pieces. Preventive and routine capital maintenance, this is roughly our million square feet of space, and what we do to make sure that it is up and ready, and it's for repairs, replacement, and upgrade. And then exterior maintenance and improvement, and similar to our buildings, proper stewardship of our land and structures on our land, is important for the safety and community value. So these are the areas. Overall, the proposed capital plan for FY19 is $1 million. That's down 209,000 from FY18 and is in keeping with what was published as the capital plan last year. Actually, I think it's down from that. I think last year it was published that this year was going to be about 1.1 million. So we're bringing it down to $1 million.
Question, is there going to be something where we can see how last year's capital plan, what was done last year and the things still necessary to happen?
I have some of that data. We can see what else we want to look at when we come up through and we look at the long-term plan. I brought 18 back in so we can see that visibility.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So the capital plan highlights over here on this side, you can see that we have our areas of focus: environmental efficiency, exterior maintenance, preventive and routine, and systems. And then underneath there's some listings of either specifics or general categories, and then the amount that's proposed to $1 million. What we're gonna do,
Have up to $1 million. That doesn't have up to $1 million. Where's the roof?
this is FY19,
Right.
this is what
We
we're
had to
proposing.
do the other half of the roof.
Yeah, and we can come to that,
Okay,
but this adds up to $1 million.
this does, okay.
And then we're gonna go through what this is, and then when we come back to the long-term plan, we can take a look at the roof.
Okay. Yeah, all right. I'm good. Just
So the largest project for next year is connecting Founders to municipal sewer. It's about $200,000 with remaining amounts in 20 and 21 to pay for the connection fee. That building is is currently on a septic system. It's a large public building on a septic system. It was engineered. There are subsequent space for fields. We've had some issues in the first 6 months that I've been here. We've had some concerns and issues with the operation of that, of the leaching and of the septic and of how it's operating. It's my professional recommendation, as well as Bruce Murdo's, is that we should move to get it onto the municipal sewer. And we've had it engineered, and the cost is about $202,000.
So I know that Essex Town restricts development by restricting sewer connection. So do we need permission to have that?
Yeah, we've already been through there. We've been to the public meetings. We've submitted our application. It's been received, and we've been told what our fee will be, and they're willing to spread that over 3 years.
Very good.
So that is a large project that was not in the capital plan whatsoever, and we feel that it is a process that it is a closed school kind of situation. If there's, as we learned just recently, plumbing is required for school operations. Yeah.
You said that fee would be spread over 3 years, so this figure will carry forward.
The fee is about, so the initial fee, it's $66,000.
Yes,
So there's $22,000 in FY19 as part of the project.
okay.
And then in FY20, there'll be $22,000, and in FY21, there'll be $22,000 out of the
So
capital.
this is earmarked
Yeah.
for the allocation, but then that will go forward in each subsequent years.
And you'll see that when I give the multi-year presentation, you'll be able to see some of that visibility.
So that stays as a capital cost, even though it's an annual fee?
It's not an annual fee, it's a one-time fee for connection and allotment, but they will allow us to
Okay.
spread it out.
Okay.
So we could have accelerated it, but we had a lot of things we were trying to balance, and we felt that
Thanks.
this approach allowed us to kind of get in and then minimize the impact of that fee.
So that, not to get too much into the weeds, but in the future budget session, you'll see an operational fee because of the fee for the school for the sewage, correct?
Yeah, we'll be like we have for a water bill
Electricity,
and that kind of stuff, yeah.
yes. Okay.
We'll have. The second largest one is to bring in capacity for flooring repairs and replacements. The big ticket items here is to go through and get some refinishing of a number of gymnasium floors. There's the floor in this building and a few others. These, if not done, you begin to look at, instead of $25,000 and $30,000 projects, you begin to look at like $250,000 and $300,000 projects. So we'd like to build them in, and we like to try to do as many at once, because then we put out a singular bid. But in addition to this, there's normal floor replacement and even some carpeting pullouts and put-ins and so forth. But it just gives us that capacity of routine maintenance. Here is playground repairs and replacements. There's been a whole series of different ways that we being all the legacy districts, have approached playgrounds. They have heavily weighed upon sort of private interest and fundraising in order to make it happen, which is taking a physical asset that we insure and leaving it up to the goodwill, intention, and success of private fundraising. I would say that that's a place that we might be able to add atop of our necessities, private fundraising and interest and so forth, but we should not be moving so that that is the only way that we're maintaining our physical structures on an exterior basis. So I'm building capacity starting this year and then moving through, and we've done a full inventory of all the playgrounds within the area, and then aged each one of them, and then worked with Visbit to identify key risks and exposures that we have. And we would start with a basis, and probably what we would see is that there's 7 significant playgrounds, and we're very possibly could be to the point where when we finish all 7, we circle back around and we start going. But this is, I look at it as we couldn't operate by fundraising and hoping the parents wanted to chip in to pave our parking lot, and we're going to be responsible for somebody getting hurt or something happening in property damage there.
So,
Since it was brought up specifically to this board, do you have an idea of whether or which playgrounds are going to be sort of tackled first? Because we did have a parent complaint for the Summit one.
Well, the intention would be to start with the oldest one that has the greatest risk exposure. That does coincidentally happen to be Summit. We're not going to be going in the route. I mean, this will be again in a basis of making sure that the basics are there, they're operational, they're safe, and they're. This isn't going to be the large committees and the imagination kind of sessions to imagine what it is, because we're going to be trying to manage a small amount of resources to go a long way. We also look to see if we can partner with both Essex Junction Rexon Park and the town's Parks and Rec to see if we can get some economies of scale, and as well as other, maybe even the League of City and Towns, to see if we can get some economy of scale. There's nobody that is the only buyer of playground equipment in a singular year, so. We're going to program ongoing capacity. This was always sort of a regular thing that was at least being done at the Essex Junction District and the U46 District with their capital fund, is to provide some ongoing capacity to address infrastructure. Because again, these major pieces of infrastructure they can create a real sawtooth within your operating budget. For instance, like one of the things is a $35,000 computer appliance that we're buying that prevents firewall intrusions and spam and all that stuff. One of the Barracuda kind of things. I've just exhausted all my knowledge. by saying the word Barracuda, I'm done.
And your
That was
face
impressive.
after we
Yeah.
showed that.
drop the mic, he's out.
So this would be ongoing capacity that would be budgeted, and as you can tell, we're you know, some of this is trying to move some of the elevation up to where we don't have this laundry list, because events occur. We don't want to treat our capital plan in a fundamentally different way than we treat our budget, which is not necessarily a line item budget. We work on an appropriations budget so that we can address what might be the most pressing and urgent things to care. Same-wise, we need to be held accountable to our voters. It's a balance. And then finally, another large area is to introduce, for the first time, some regular capacity going to address landscaping and land improvements for things such as pedestrian safety, drainage, and appearance. We just have never done it, and again, I think that this is, for me, in an element, there's a number of times when we're not fully addressing things because we don't have that capacity to fully address them. We're certainly meeting the minimum requirements or the compliance requirements, but I think in a world that will soon be school choice and of some nature, and that will be in an area there, that we need to make sure that when somebody walks up to our property, that it shows that it's a place that they are welcome, they belong, and that it will be a place where they can be ready to learn. So the random shrub that didn't get cut down 8 years ago doesn't become our garden in the front of one of our buildings.
Brian, so this is our capital plan. Is this the capital request, or is this just what we're expecting to expend in this coming year? Is this a money in, money out in same year, or a longer term plan?
These are all in and outs, but a capital plan can have an in accumulate, in again, and then expend. These would be expenses within the year.
So we'd be asking to put $1 million into the capital fund and.
Which we intend to immediately spend.
Right.
And is there anything in there that you mentioned with the flooring repairs and replacements, that some of that is just frankly ongoing maintenance as opposed to a capital investment necessarily? Is there, even if not in this year, is there an expectation that as we look at sort of a multi-year plan on a capital plan, that we acknowledge some of those pieces that are more of a maintenance nature, or they're ongoing? Because it's never happened in our time in having a capital item on the ballot that's been voted down. But if these are things that must happen, then that being a separate item is a risk. And if there are parts of that that are of a more ongoing maintenance nature, if not for this year, I think that'd be a conversation worth having for how to properly budget for them if they're not in fact capital improvements.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's, I mean, we can certainly take some time and dive into how we want to manage this part of our budget. I think what I'm doing, building from last year's work and then adding in some elements that, at least that I found over time, give us the flexibility and the generality that we need. And while making sure that we're maintaining things that are mission critical.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think the big part that you want a capital fund to do is to eliminate some sawtoothing that can happen within individual budgets. And so that you have capacity outside, so that your high school budget isn't spiking one year or a certain line item is spiking another year, because that capacity can, when it goes away, it's really hard to have it come back.
Absolutely. No, I think it was more to a
we
schedule
need-
of ongoing replacements is really a maintenance
Yeah.
matter as opposed to a
And
capital matter.
this tries to create, actually, I think this tries to create the land in between operating budget and bonding.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely.
So, if we had a capital project, we would not be doing this to build a wing onto a building.
Absolutely not.
So those kind of capital investments would be much more significant, but this is sort of the space in between. And then by giving some predictability, here's a long-term capital plan. So this is over time, what this contemplates is that over time, the capital plan will be going down last year, it was contemplated that it would be going down to 400 or some number. I'm not sure how, I'm not sure if that
It
number
was
was just that it got there intentionally to say that it was gonna go at 400, or that was just all the projects that were thought of, and that it may be a different number in the future. But this basically has us so that we arc down over the course of time that we have the incentives to come back to about 1% of the general fund expenditures. So that would bring us to there. And then what it does is it gives some ongoing capacity so that we know, in some ways that there's some predictability. We can plan, we can cross fiscal years with capital funds, we can aggregate bidding with the capital fund. It just definitely provides us a great deal more flexibility. It operates the way that, in generally accepted accounting practices, this would operate in Fund 300. So it's outside of your general fund, and it gives you an ability to carry over fund balance and other things. That is really helpful in dealing with. So you can see, like, for instance, we did the roof repairs of 665. In working with Bruce, that capacity will get us so that we feel pretty comfortable that we'll be able to do about 3/4 of the entire high school off of that amount of money. And there's a certain capacity that, like, the next time, like, if we do that now, we can come back and address the stuff that still has some more useful life to it in a future year. So the idea was to try to do it all at once. For economies, we're finding the economies are already there in the marketplace, and the cost per square foot is really attractive. So that's why when we looked at that number changing, and we knew that the municipal sewer project was a real imperative, and you can see how that feathers off and goes away, but there's a general capacity within here that makes sure that we have something going to preventive and routine maintenance. And there's a general capacity here that's going to exterior maintenance improvement. So in future years, we may say, you know what we need to do? We need to do $400,000 of paving, because we wanna take something and bring it right down and bring it all the way back, or change our drainage, or put some green space in. A lot of our parking lots are very typical sort of 1970s, 1980 parking lots. They're designed very differently nowadays for calming and other things like that, so.
Hopefully stormwater as well.
Yeah,
Well, it's helpful to see it in its multi-year purpose. The asking for it and having it go out in the same year just feels different than sort of planning for the longer term expenses and having a plan for what's going to be utilized this year, but knowing that you've got something bigger coming down the road.
yeah.
I appreciate being able to see the multi-year situation and know that some years we may be carrying over more than we had anticipated, and it'll be used for similar purposes in subsequent years. So
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah.
Brian, there doesn't appear to be any rolling stock in there. Are they all below what we would put in the budget? Or are they something we budget out for? Because there's no, I know that we've got a bunch of trucks, I know at some point here we have service truck replacement. Are there others other than the service truck?
Those are our larger items. At about $55,000, we can replace just about any one of the major pickup or the food service truck or so forth. The lawnmowers, though, they can run as high as $40,000 for some of the larger lawnmowers that we do. We have just built that capacity regularly into operating funds because there's a lot of wear and tear. It's about 90 acres that most of them are cutting. So those that we've built into operating.
Can I ask a very parochial question? Is the driveway and parking lot at Westford gonna, okay, I was hoping that was what that was.
Oh, that can happen this time of year at Westford?
I don't know if we, it depends, I guess, right?
Depends on what.
How nice we are during budget development session. No, that is,
I'll bring
That is
him
scheduled.
cookies next time.
that is scheduled, and there's quite a bit of sort of backed up pavement and drainage and pedestrian reorganization that we need to do in future years, so that's trying to build some of that capacity up as well.
Is that related to, and I don't know if it's a BizBid issue or anything, but the sidewalk between these two buildings, the middle school and Founders, that passage there?
Yeah,
I
there's,
remember
there's
that being
quite a,
an issue.
there's a little bit, definitely a little bit here, and Founders parking lot, there's a couple of things that are pretty tight. To where you wanna, they all were more than in standard before, but as different things change, you just wanna provide a little bit more space, a little bit more designation.
So then, these specific little minor projects, as they maybe will be listed for the general public to know that Westford paving and some sidewalks in specific spots will be noted in the report?
Yeah, typically what this would do, and it could go out into the public, version, is that there would be a narrative that would talk about what are those primary things.
There's a danger in that,
Right.
though. I'd
Mm.
be a
Their
little
project.
careful.
Yeah.
Why is this town getting this many dollars worth of projects versus, and I don't want that kind of narrative to start happening.
Well, I wonder, not necessarily to that, because I don't know whether or not we need to have it be specific, but I think we did have a fairly specific, as we were either unifying or putting forth our merger vote, something that looked at the longer-term capital needs. And I don't remember when that took place, because I don't remember if it was part of the merger study or if it was shortly
Capital-
after.
In the annual
the
report last
board.
year, the capital plan that was published was 3
It was
pages long.
a few years out too, right? It was,
Yeah,
so there,
but I think
it might be if there's
it-
long-term plans for things that you're anticipating, whether or not there's specific dollar figures that may
Yeah,
be
the
beneficial.
capital plan was done by, you brought in a consultant at the time of,
But it
Critical.
did break
Yeah,
down.
It was fairly
Did
specific.
to what
Did
you're
break down.
asking.
Okay, I know that sometimes in town reports, it'll say, it won't tell me specifically was, but it might say, well, Greenwood Drive was replaced, and the sewer in such and such a place was redone, and of course, the water main break on Dunsmore was done, and it will list those various things along the way, so even if it's not forward, okay, it might be in arrears saying, these were
Yeah.
the things that were
What did we do last
accomplished
year?
with that.
Yeah.
I'd just like to have that notification to the public,
yeah,
so that even if it's not forward, then it is in arrears.
Yeah.
That's a
yeah,
great
I
idea.
I had the
That's a great
person
idea.
walk into my office with that all tallied up by sight.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Are you, this capital plan? Yeah.
From the annual report,
And I wonder, Brian, I
arguing
love that
why their
idea.
building wasn't getting as much as other buildings.
Yeah,
I
no, worry.
wonder if, I always found that to be sort of a compelling way to ask for more capital support, is
Show what you're doing.
show what had been done with the previous year's
Yeah.
capital
Yeah.
investment. And different than doing a spreadsheet that's with specific dollar amounts on specific years and times for each of those projects, we could do like a 3-year needs in the next 3 years, or needs in the next 5 years, needs in the next 10 years, whatever, to whatever extent that's information you have, and whatever breakpoints make sense to you, to pull them together so people have some idea that this is part of a longer-term plan, and we're
Yeah.
recognizing needs going
Yeah.
forward.
And I think we're also,
that's-
we're looking at a large, probably bonded type of project somewhere in this range, 21 and 22. You have a natural resources building and a building trades building that is, it's well past its useful life and it's been added on a number of times. And then there are some other areas that we have that I think we want to put together a whole package, but I agree, I love the idea of even showing it in pictures. This is what we've
Yeah.
done, these are our projects, I think,
Yeah,
know,
we
pictures
usually
of
did
this.
that.
Yeah,
solar arrays and other things really
yeah.
show stewardship and
Yeah.
show responsibility, so.
So who are we thinking about at some point putting our administration's spaces together? And the second big thing is, what are
Or a
we,
tram.
yeah, what are we doing with the ACE program? We have next year and one more year.
Yes,
but that's it.
Over the city.
Essex.
yes,
You're having those discussions.
yeah.
Okay, that's all I need to
Yep.
know. You'll come back with something at some point.
Yeah, I mean, and that will be a broader thing, probably a lot of, we'll be wanting to reach out to stakeholders and involve the board and
Yeah,
our community to see what it is, how can we meet all our needs in a responsible fiscal way. But I think that the idea, there's a lot of energy, we're not in an ideal situation having the central office split up between two locations. But I think that there would be little tolerance in today's environment to be trying to sink a whole bunch of money into
I
a
agree.
nicer place for administration to work.
I agree.
I think too, part of our transition recognizes that there may still be attrition, that maybe central office is still working on the exact right size
Right.
or
So you don't want
bodies
to
and
spill
roles and
space
responsibilities,
until-
so
yeah.
that, it wouldn't make sense to
We also
go
know that,
headstrong into.
we're
building.
down almost 800 students from our high. It would seem like there would be some square footage somewhere in our district if we have 800 less
That's
students.
what we keep thinking.
Well, I watched what happened in Westford. You just expanded. People who used to be in little spaces
Right.
now are in big spaces. You just expand
And
to
I think the
fill
way
it
education's delivered is different too. I mean,
to
you're not all
some
sitting
degree,
in
but I
tables
can.
in a row,
Yeah.
little
Right,
seats.
but
you know.
still. Okay, yes,
Way off
Al.
topic.
IT wanted to, about 2 years ago, wanted to move back to the high school. And it seemed like there was just no space at that time.
All right, we're getting far afield. Let's keep going. And I apologize because I did part of that.
Well, you'll get asked.
Let's take a look at the tax impact. So I brought this back because
Because we liked it so much.
and I reordered it.
Oh, you
So,
did. Yeah, no.
proposed, estimated, equalized pupils, yield, common level appraisal.
I missed the circles.
Well,
Those circles have
the
never come back.
bubbles, the bubbles.
Bubbles.
I'm gonna suggest you reorder it the other way around.
I
because
think
The,
I
the
agree.
impact on the cost to taxpayers is probably most driven by the expenses, right? Just if you turn them exactly the
Yeah.
other way around.
Which they were in the last
Oh, I'm
time.
sorry. They
Right.
were totally,
They
no,
were
I think they were more
No, they were
erratically.
totally the opposite.
Oh, no, then
And then
ignore
it was
me. If
suggested that
everybody thought it
they
go the
needed to
other
be
way.
reordered.
So,
The
Because
slides
it
go
was
away.
cynical, okay, I'm just
but
picturing it
the top
visually.
is where you start.
So we
But
have,
I was doing the math from down up. and
we have, this is after capital fund allocation. So we have our budgeted expenses, our gross expenses, minus our offsetting
I'm
revenue,
messing with Brian.
educational spending, plus the capital plan to get to the total educational spending. Compared to FY 18, that's an increase of 258,000 or roughly 0.42%. Yep. Got our equalized pupil, then we have our ed spending per equalized pupil. Take total ed spending divided by that to get 16,284. Take our projected FY 19 total ed spending divided by our new equalized pupil and get 16,061, or roughly 1.37% decline.
That's great, Brian.
That's great.
We have our yield, wonderful yield situation, our homestead tax, our minus our incentive to get down to our incentive tax rate. And then we have our common level of appraisals that works, here's 18, here's 19, roughly 7 cents going up across the board, or just around a range of 4.4 to 4.7. This is the income sensitivity. I'm gonna get a tutorial after the meeting. Because I'm a little skittish of this. So basically, we're taking a look at what's happening in our local budget and trying to then impacting that into income sensitivity. So from 2% is the base for income sensitivity, right?
Yeah.
So 2.57 to just barely an increase of 0.1.
If you can reschedule the tutorial, I'd enjoy it.
Yeah,
We'll take a look at them.
it's hard because you have to make an adjustment for the incentive as well.
Hmm.
So it isn't just using the yield.
Oh, okay, interesting.
So.
So we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
But then if we take a look at the revised
Not sure I can
preliminary
do it at
and we
9
do the
o'clock
what
at
if
night.
that we did before, so all the same numbers up here, the 1.37% decline in equalize, but now we hold the yield the same, and then we come down and we hold the CLA the same, we would be seeing across the board, basically flat tax rate.
And the in-between, the gray in-between, Brian, is that answer won't be set by the legislature between that 4 or 5% increase in this level tax rate. That is the piece that, in our communications, I think we just want to make clear that is yet to have been set. That's the anticipated
Yeah.
information received, but that information comes in when budgets have been approved, right? Did I get that
So
right?
right, so I expect that the House will put out a yield bill in the next couple weeks that will be based on the budgets that have been reported so far. So we may have the advantage of, I don't know, it's hard to know what to do with it, but we might be able to present two scenarios. This is based on the tax commissioner's December letter. This is based on what the House has passed, based on the budgets that have come in so far. Again, you have to keep reminding people that they're voting on the budget, not on a tax rate, and that the tax rates are never known until the legislature adjourns. Yeah.
So, late today, the Free Press issued an article that says that to date, the districts that have shared their FY19 budget numbers represents a 2.1% increase in education spending, and the projection was 3.5.
So that's going to bring yield down.
They do note that Burlington and the large districts of Burlington and Essex Westford have not yet submitted their numbers.
Well, we won't be able to, probably. We won't.
We've done,
Well, we might.
I'm not sure what Grant had done in the past, but I knew that every time that we had submitted a preliminary budget, we ended up having problems with, because that data got in and our budget was different at the end.
Yeah. Certainly until we vote on a budget, we shouldn't submit it. Once we've voted on what we're going to propose, that's what everyone else is submitting, so we can do that.
That was February 1st was the deadline for preliminary budgets.
But that's for folks who are
Right.
voting in March.
Yeah, and that's why we just don't.
Right.
So,
Okay.
if you take a look at after the capital fund, our total projected educational spending is the 61 million. That our projected educational spending per equalized pupil expenses is down 1.37%. And then we're gonna jump into a little bit of what has consolidation done. And I'm gonna focus exclusively on personnel.
Oh, okay.
So if we take a look at one-time savings from consolidation, and we take a look at year one, which is the year we're in right now, FY18, and we know that we had the subtraction of a superintendent position, a business manager position, a bookkeeper, that was a total of $357,000. If we look at year two, we'll be eliminating the director of legal support, director of learning design, the director of child nutrition, a farm-to-school specialist, a staff assistant in special ed, a mechanical systems supervisor, and a financial analyst. for a total of $740,000. We are going to reinvest some of that money, some of that savings, back into a one-year assignment of a purchase and systems manager. That's Bob Clifford coming back in, and a learning design specialist, that's Ellen coming back in and focusing on the PLPs and the other system design structures that we want. And then a staff assistant coming in to support some of the gaps that we have with the two major departures. So we have a net of 563,000. So this is the one time as the positions in that we get to have the immediate savings. And that totals us up right now. After we get through next year, we will be at just roughly 1.1 million. However, if you take a look at the projected gross cumulative savings in the first 5 years of operation as a result, it's more like 4.8, 4.9 million. Because what I do here is I take a look at that one-time savings, but what we've changed is the trajectory of our expenses. So if I take that one-time savings and I multiply it by an inflation rate of 1.5%, which I think is fairly conservative for wages and benefits, but I multiply it out, eliminating those three positions in year one will ultimately have a savings of $1.8 million over the first 5 years. Taking a look at the positions we're eliminating going into next year's budget, doing the same escalator with the inflation, we're at 3 million. So it's a gross amount of $4.8 million, 4.9. And then we have these reinvestments. Some of the reinvestments end after year one. So overall, we're looking at the first 5 years, we've changed the trajectory that we would have had $4.6 million of expenses inside of a budget. So I think this is where we want to start to see how this takes root and how we want to be working these numbers. Again, I'm focusing just on the personnel. I can tie this out to the penny on everything. It's not like trying to prove an exception or try to prove a negative where like, well, had Westford not done it, you know, it's trying to prove this thing that is, I can't grab names and people and everything. It's all hypothetical. This, I think, if we stay here, and you can imagine that over the course of the next 3 years of budgeting, we may have a longer and longer list, and we may have series of investments and reinvestments and then savings coming through, that we could show the taxpayers that, you know, this is real money that has been taken out of that stream of expenses that would have been increasing each year.
Do we have purchasing, like, are you able to demonstrate yet, benefits from scale on purchasing? Or were we already also big enough? in that
Yeah, I mean, we were certainly, we weren't too far behind. I mean, both districts were using the food service purchasing co-op, and there was some purchasing. I mean, we will see some of it, but I think what we want to do is bring in Bob, and if we can move all our school supply purchasing, or a good portion of it, like just paper, if we could move that to a statewide contract and uniform that, then that could be some real dollars. I mean, we do, 15 million copies or something, a crazy number a year.
I was thinking, I think Brian, I had reached out to you guys when Donna Russa-Savage came and shared insight from the AOE at the VSBA meeting. To the extent you guys are comfortable, I think that's really good information to share back to her. I think they're looking to understand the impact of Act 46 and to help have real examples of where we're seeing efficiencies from that, even though that wasn't necessarily the driver for any of these decisions. It's bearing out in a lot of places.
Yeah. Well, and it's particularly bearing out mostly in the larger districts that we're merging, not just inside of an SU, but we're merging multiple districts. I mean, that's where we get, 1.8 of the savings is just the fact that we were an SD and an SU.
Yep.
I thought that Vincent presented to us what he was finding consolidated savings in IT and part of the purchasing with especially the books and what, the small tablet computers and whatnot. So, I mean, I thought you already
The
presented.
financing system, I think,
Yeah,
we
that's-
said last year was a savings or something.
Yeah, I'm sure there
I think it was
is.
tech.
You know,
There
in,
was text, it was licenses for,
No, it's less significant, obviously,
Yeah.
than this, but to the extent there's other things that you've noticed, efficiencies that
Yeah.
aren't hard to find,
well, I think,
tabulating that.
right. I think the other big area where you can show savings, if you can figure out the right numbers, is Westford tuition.
yeah,
I mean, that should be a concrete number. Yeah. Ow.
The thing I wanted to ask about this was, is there a phase 2, 3, or 4 consolidation plan over the subsequent years, 19, 20, 21? Does the administration have any plans in that area?
so more consolidation of,
Absolutely.
yeah,
And the reason that I ask that is because it appears to be, we're in a more volatile situation with the state, and some of the proposed policies, I'm pretty concerned that there will be another wave of exodus from the state, and there'll be continuing yield problems. Just strategically anticipating that, that's why I think the board needs to know that there are additional consolidation efforts underway to address what looks to be increased volatility. Just a thought, okay?
Brendan and Marla.
So I just wanted to say thank you for pulling this together. I think, as has been indicated by some of the comments, it probably represents the minimum savings that we've realized or that we expect to realize. And I think this is exactly the kind of data that gives me a lot of confidence to be able to talk to people about the fact that we are beginning to see the promised savings much sooner than we expected. I mean, we promised $1 million of savings over 5 years, and we're already seeing close to that in 2.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's great. Thank you.
Yes. Marla.
I wanted to say kudos to you too, Brian and Beth, who's ever worked on it. But on a consolidation plan, I would be very careful personally myself, not wanting to see something out there of positions or things that might happen in the future, because there are staff that will naturally retire. I would hate to lose somebody who's been here 10 years and they have a lot of knowledge and we still want to keep them. So I think as the attrition happens, it should come together.
Well, our work with the DMG group in cohort 2, our work with the DMG report on our supporting struggling students, those 2 elements have some really good opportunities to just better inform us to how to use attrition and also how to use some other tools. I mean, this board participated in it with us, as the early notification incentive that we did was able to give us a great deal of planning capability, and that worked around people. So, yeah, we know our district has a huge amount of attrition coming down the path. It's just happening with the age of all your directors and many of your administrators and the years of service people have had. I mean, this district in the course of this 5 years is going to be really a different group of, a different cohort of employees.
I think we have to be careful that we don't go too far. I trust you to do that, but we don't want to get to a place where we can't operate well, so, right. Okay, any last questions for tonight? I'd like to read are you done? Oh, God, yes, you have a question. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the clock.
Yeah. So, again, with our current educational spending already at a place that is, just really good. More than 1.25% down from FY18 in our per pupil spending, equalized pupil spending. I do wonder, though, whether there's an interest at all for the board Level ed spending would be a process, so that's before we do our division of our equalized pupils. Though again, we're already showing where we are. This sometimes, I know in the past, has been a curiosity of what would it take to, carve a cent off. I've always wondered, like, if it doesn't actually, like, if you're not just 1 cent off from being something, you're just 1 more cent down. So, but that's $380,000 of reductions that would be necessary to save that cent. Or we can continue on this refine and review again stage going into next budget session.
Thoughts?
I like the third. I think as the budget is coming together, you're finding and putting together with our 2 budget directors we had last year and the change. So,
And I would remind us again, although I'm not sure exactly what language he used, but the governor asked that or recommended in districts that were seeing an increase in equalized pupils, that they hold their, I don't know if it's their ed spending or their ed spending per equalized pupil. I would have to go back and look at, but let's assume it's ed spending, to less than 2.4%. What we've seen so far is far less than 2.4%. So personally, I'd go with number 3. I don't see a reason to put up reductions that you don't think would give her. You've already put up the reductions that you think are reasonable to maintain the quality of education that we have in our district. So, anything else? Got what you need? Okay, so Kim says we do need an executive session. Does anyone know where we might?
Go right in there in that lending
Lending
library. There's no
library.
seats, but I think
Oh.
that
It'd be good.
it'll be quick.
We can be
Right.
quick. All right, so let's do that.
what is going to be in the motion, employee negotiations and employee?
Oh, I'm sorry. I will entertain. No, it's just.
Yeah, that can be really quick, yeah.
What they sent out.
We need both, yes, because, okay. So I'll entertain a motion that, sorry, Marla, that we go into executive session to discuss employee contract negotiations and employee
Discipline.
discipline. Thank you. What?
Did you make the motion?
No, Brenton made the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. And we will retire to the other room.